Hello, I'm Karina Elisa Cardona Claros, or Karina Cardona, as most people call me. When I was a kid, I attended classes in the basement studios and got to be shown in through the eyes of a child. The Winnipeg Art Gallery provided me not just with art education, but with a sense of confidence about that my story mattered and that I could find different ways to tell it. Throughout my adulthood, I've participated in lots of different community art projects and sat on different boards. The board I sat on the longest was with Art City, and I think my contribution there as a person of color, as well as a woman with disability, was asking us to consider how to listen for silence, or how to look around the room and say, who's missing here? You know, who do we need at this table? And how can we invite them to be here? How can we consider what they'll need or ask what they'll need in order to be present and feel welcome? And there's a lot of humility needed in asking hard questions and holding difficult conversations, which is where institutions find themselves in large part right now, because people are coming forward with their stories and their experiences of exclusion. I look at geographies of exclusion and I ask myself, who are spaces for? Who do they exclude? And how are those prohibitions maintained in place? And I think those are really important questions for community organizations, government, policymakers to be asking themselves, but also we can find answers to this work through art. And the exhibit Born in Power, there's a lot of things that resonate for me. Ella Cooper's selfie series was so special in seeing a woman not smiling with a big smile off the bat right into a camera lens, which is how women are often portrayed in print media and online as well. I don't spend my day smiling all the time, and there's nothing wrong with it, but it's nice to see people in various emotional states, and women in particular, and for a judgment not to be made, but to recognize, they're going through a day. We see in Callie Spitzer's photography that old school tintype look, and to have that be done by a BIPOC artist is really important, because old school photography, like that tintype style, was often a white gaze placed on people like slaves and by settlers, and there was a lot of agency lost in the imagery that we collected through this era of photography. And so to see that gaze turned into just the display of a different kind of confidence and pride for people that want to be in front of that camera, that can look straight into that lens and say, you understand me, I trust you to capture me and share my image. There's something really special and important about the trust that gets built in those kinds of dynamics for artists and people that they feature. Having worked as a mentor on different projects, or environmental projects, arts projects, I now see Shimbi making films, and Shimbi I just attended workshops with when I was in my 20s and they were still a teenager. And it's amazing to see what kinds of things people produce, through the generations. Something I especially love doing is sharing knowledge with younger folks. I love holding conversations with young people, and to do it around creating something or making work or looking at art. But it gives us a space that challenges the way we think, also allows us to open up authentically, and makes us feel safe in expressing who we are. It's these little kinds of steps that are how we establish reconciliation, how we build understanding, because we open our hearts and our spaces to one another. We make the invitation real. And this is just kind of the interpersonal dynamics, but to see it scaled up into the institutions is really key. At Art City, one of the things that I appreciated being a part of was the annual festival. And that's really a space where people come to create all month long and then get to take their work to the streets and to share all their creations around a theme. But it's really the closing piece, the parade. It's all that time that you spend together making these stories happen. The spectacle you can offer to photographers and news people later, that's for posterity, but the process itself is really where the change happens. And so I'm very driven by the process. I appreciate organizations that are asking the questions around exclusion and inclusion and sustainability. So Arts and Accessibility Network of Manitoba is making arts more possible for artists with disabilities. At this point, over 10 years into their process, into their establishment, having funded staff, having funding opportunities available to artists is a huge milestone from where they were 10 years ago. And so as a woman with disability, one of the key messages I think I want to share in terms of exclusion and building bridges to the arts has a lot to do with, what does it take for an artist to be at the table with programming, to the transport that's needed, the funding that might be needed, and has an invitation truly be made possible. And so a couple years ago, I had the honor of creating a workshop for Youth Agencies Alliance called Crip the Program. And so with Crip the Program, we were talking about how to examine your organization for exclusion and how to build inclusive practices. And I think that's something we need to do more and more of, and I hope more organizations ask these questions. My own personal lived experience, I think, around arriving in Canada as a refugee, being exposed to children's art from that came from war, and also using art to rehabilitate after a spinal cord injury, really tuned me into the need for people to have opportunities to express. And I don't think there's any better way of getting to know one another and to trusting one another and understanding one another than to be with one another in the way that we open our hearts and minds. And so even when we let out a big sigh, we see this on the words in the gallery right now. On the walls, we just say, this is where we're coming from and this is where we want to go. And when we're listened to, that something changes, when we're listened. And so to see the WAG through Jamie and her collaborators putting together exhibits that feature the stories of all kinds of people from all walks of life, it's really important because everybody's stories matter. And I think at this point in time when we're collecting history, to tell the story of humanity, we want to show everybody's stories, and we want to do that through their perspective. And I just hope that we can continue moving down that path. Moving forward, I hope that organizations here that aren't necessarily arts-based, but like Communities Not Cuts, really starts to build more and more momentum into those social movements that are going to see us to the next phase of where we need to go, to build solidarity, to build resilience. And the more that we're able to listen to one another's stories and witness one another's life, I think we can value one another more, and that we can open opportunities for greater inclusion. Currently I'm working on a short film with the Prairie Climate Center about the intersections of disability justice and climate justice, and I really look forward to sharing that with you in the future too.